Welcome to the Backroads Bill podcast. I'm Ben, and for the next two episodes, we've got a bit of a two-parter coming up. So this weekend, it is the very well-known Mattawa Canoe Race, and I've been entered into it alongside with my coworker Michaela, and we have to survive a grueling 64-kilometer race on Saturday. So Bill and myself brought on the expert himself, Brian Taylor, who is the recently retired GM CAO of the Mattawa North Bay Conservation Authority, who, although he didn't actually make this race happen, he still is able to bring a lot of his expertise for doing this for many years. So we brought Brian on to talk about what to expect. And the biggest question I have is, will we even survive? Well, welcome to kind of, I guess, a bit of a special episode. The next two episodes are going to be a little bit special on the Backroads Bill podcast, as if you don't know, there is a very famous canoe race coming up on June 8th, so this coming Saturday, and some people, Bill and Scott, decided that it would be a good idea if I, along with our coworker Michaela, entered into this canoe race, which, by the way, I thought it would be like an easy one. It's 64 kilometers. So if there's another episode coming out after that, you know I survived. So we'll go from there. But we have a very special guest on today. We have Brian Taylor, who is recently retired. He was the GM CAO of North Bay Mattawa Conservation Authority. Brian, welcome to the program, and congratulations on your recent retirement.
Oh, thank you very much.
And so, Bill, I went into this blind. Like the only thing I know is Brian's name and title. So I went into this relatively blind because I really don't know what to expect. So, and it was your idea to get Brian on here. So I want you to set the table a little bit and get the audience, I guess, acquainted with what's going to happen in this episode.
Well, on all the Backroads Bills podcasts, Ben, you are special because you're the producer, but it was special to get Brian on because of his tenure at the Conservation Authority. And this is a famed race in marathon canoeing going back, to the centennial year of 1967, when it was 196 kilometers long, and it went from Ville-Marie, Quebec to North Bay. And then in 1975, the decision was made to make it a shorter race from North Bay to Mattawa, but it is a marathon canoe race. It really reflects upon our heritage, and Brian had been through a number of them over his 15-year tenure, so that's why he's on the program, because he wants to fill you and all the listeners in about the race, and so we'll peck away at this, and Brian, if you go back, remembering 15 years ago or more, I guess, what did you first think about when you inherited the Conservation Authority and there was this 64-kilometer race, which is kind of different when you look at conservation authorities?
Yeah, I started in June of 2003, and so the race was only a couple of months off. And amongst trying to get familiar with the new Conservation Authority and the staff and all the things going on, there was this thing looming 2 months out. So it was actually a good distraction. It turned out to be a great trip and a great distraction the first year in terms of finding something fun to do and maybe one of my first public forays out into the community. So, and we're not the only conservation authority. Pardon me if I say we a bit. I'm only recently retired. We're not the only conservation authority. I think there are one or two others that may do smaller canoe races, but it's a great thing to do.
Yeah, conservation authorities do have that educational outreach, community networking, and so for sure. And again, when I look at this, and I'm looking over at Ben here in the studio right now, it is 64 kilometers. And Ben, I knew you were going to ask Brian that question. Why didn't you ask him that question? But I kind of filled it in a little bit of the history with what went on in the past.
So I didn't realize that there was a 13 kilometer version, and Michaela came up to me and said, "You're going to be really mad about this." But there's a 13 kilometer version. I was like, why didn't we do that one? So I don't know if we're going to finish or not, but I guess my question to you, Brian, is why? Why is it 64 kilometers?
Well, that's the distance from North Bay to Mattawa. I guess that's the simple question.
That is a simple answer.
Yeah, a simple answer. But yeah,
that it is 64 kilometers, and for the listeners, we have to say that, and I'd forgotten the number of portages. I could do it with my fingers, and I guess, but there's the portages along the way because it reflects upon the voyageur route going east and west, west to east, and so there's that added element that not only just you have to paddle, Ben, you have to get out of the canoe and go along these many portages, which some are easy and easier, and some are not, and it is that, and it's always amazes me, Brian, when you think about it, of the 64 kilometers. And I've looked at the records again. The ultimate record is in tandem is 5 hours and 37 minutes, and I've been in the race, and I always marvel at that time, and then you've experienced it, but just a couple of comments on that.
Yeah, the record time, just about 5.5 hours, was before my time, but there were quite a few races where people were very close to getting that record time, and it really depends on the conditions. There are 12 portages,
yes,
that are there, and as you said, you don't have to run them all on your feet. Some you can run on the water as well. But the race is really dependent on the water conditions. How high is the water? You've got turtle and talon and pine, and Trout Lake, of course, which are lakes, and they have their own unique challenges, particularly wind. But then the rest of the route is all waterway, and it's probably a good thing that in the mid-'70s, when the Conservation Authority took it over, they decided to flip the route. Originally, people were going from Mattawa to North Bay to Trout Lake, and of course, you're paddling upstream when you do that route. So I was looking back at the records too. Amazingly enough, when the route was reversed, paddling upstream, there were times that were very close to the record, despite the fact that you were going the opposite way and having to paddle upstream. So, long history. Just a side note, I remember the first time that I saw the canoe race, and it would have been not too long after the first one that was in '67, probably the early '70s. My grandfather, that had a place on Trout Lake, piled us in the boat, probably too many of us, but piled us in a boat, and we all went down to the end of Turtle Lake, where Pine Lake enters in, and watched 3 canoes come blasting through. If I remember right, they were single paddlers, and blasting through the portage and hitting the water and canoeing like crazy up Turtle Lake and to the finish line. And that was my first introduction to the race. I would have been a young pup at that point in time.
Yeah, that's going to be us. That's going to be us when we go across that finish line.
That's going the other way. Now,
yeah.
I just want you to remember, Ben, the word blasting and paddling like crazy, because those are things that you'll be doing come June 8th. Just over a week from when this podcast comes out. So that's important. I mean, I've mapped the river in a thematic map. So I don't want to say I've been down the Mattawa River more times than most people, but probably in the top 10, and it doesn't really matter. And been in the race. It is a marathon race. And when you are paddling feverishly in like a voyageur, that it's amazing again that most recreational paddlers, and when you look at the records, will paddle it somewhere between efficiently about 6 to 8 hours. I mean that's still a good time. It's like people running marathons. If you put in a time of 3 hours plus, that's a respectable run. And the same and again, I remember we used to hold the record of the voyageur canoe, no longer, and that took us at the time, I think, about, it could have been just shy, around about 10 hours, but it was a long slog because of the size of the canoe. But I wanted to go back to a couple of things, Ben and Brian, is that, of course, the conditions. If you have to paddle into a headwind on Talon or some sections of the Mattawa River heading into Bouillon Lake, and as you get closer to Mattawa, that's going to be a challenge for sure. Never mind the portages. So conditions are such, and who knows? It could be a fair weather day, and it might not. But those are things that all racers have to address as they're going. Do you remember any stories, Brian, that come to mind with regards to any one of the races? And I must tell the listeners too that, of course, there was a short break during the COVID and was picked up last year. So it's a new era come again. But any stories that you can remember?
Yes, after 2005, probably around 2007, I remember the one year that we had a bad windstorm go through the week before the race. And there was wind shear. It was very bad. A lot of the portages had lots of trees down, and we were wondering whether we were even going to be able to have the race. And with the good work of some of our staff at the Conservation Authority, but municipalities and the province, we managed to get all of the portages cleared. There were big trees down, usually large poplar trees that were, 10, 12, 14, 16 inches wide. And we managed to get the portages cleared and make sure that everybody could get through. And if I remember right, the race day was a beautiful day, and went off really successfully. So that one comes to mind. When you're on Talon and out on the lake, you can still look up in the hillside and see where the wind shear went through and where it just flattened sections of the forest. So that was kind of exciting. And then we've had bad weather. I remember being on Mattawa Island, which is the finishing location, and sometime mid-afternoon thunderstorms went through, and I can remember lightning hitting all over the place. No paddlers were in danger or anything, but just the weather is always in the afternoon a bit of a challenge. The wind comes up and things like that happen. So we've never lost a paddler, Ben.
Oh, good. Well, it's funny you say that though, because not about the paddler, but you were talking about kind of that wind storm that came through, because I have a family cottage on Talon, so I remember when that kind of happened. That was wild. There was, I'll never forget it felt like there was almost like when you have the fires and you see there's no trees around, there was nothing. It was weird. But I do remember watching the paddlers go by, because we could kind of see it from where our cottage was. You could see the paddlers go through it. But one of the questions I wanted to ask to kind of go on with the weather and stuff, and I don't know, Brian, how much you were kind of part of this, but they did decide to change the time of the race. Usually, I believe it was August, right, Bill? That it used to be or it used to be later in the year, but they decided to go earlier. And I just wanted to kind of get the comments from you, Brian, if you have any comments on I think I have an idea of why, but just to kind of give us an idea of what the decision behind that was.
Sure. I mean, I wasn't part of the decision. I retired by that point in time, but it used to be the last weekend in July, and it would coincide with the Mattawa Heritage Festival that happened. My understanding is that it was changed after some discussions with paddlers and the Ontario Marathon Canoe and Kayak Association into June. Just a bit more of a convenient time for water level, I think, was a big part of the reason for the decision. The rivers hopefully will have a little bit more water in them for you, Ben, on June 8th. Because the end of July, the river can be, it's always flowing, but it can be a bit low.
Yeah, I can speak to that. Because I'm at the Canadian Ecology Center, I'm almost see the river every day or walk down to see it. And with climate change over a period of time, now we're seeing, before we'd have the spring freshet, you'd have a peak water level, and Brian's quite right, it would trickle down in the summer. Now we're seeing, because of rain events, we're seeing the river has some peaks and troughs even in the summertime. But other than the black flies, this early start will be in favor of you, Ben, and Michaela, because there is water, and it's, again, we're only 2 weeks out, so to speak, and it'll be better all the way around. So some of the racers do shoot, other than Parachute Falls, they'll do all the rapids based on their skill level, based on the type of canoe, because it is when the water is low, it's a notorious river to have rocks in it. So, and again, some choose to run the rapids because of time.
Yeah, it would be faster, right? Like I'm assuming those 5.5 hour races were probably doing that, right?
Yeah, other than I should say the Talon shoots and Parachute Falls. I missed that one because those are the two big cataracts along on the way, and then the rest are the portages, as Brian mentioned earlier.
Okay, Brian, I got to ask, with obviously not an overly competitive person, probably not going to be in that 5.5 hour mark. We don't even know if we're going to finish, but we're going to try. How competitive do you think the overall field is? Like, do you think, like, are there going to be other people who aren't going to be like trying to race for time, or are we going to be kind of in the mix of, I guess, people who are just doing it for fun?
Oh, I would say the people that are doing it for fun with a mild amount of competitive instinct in them are the majority. So you won't be alone. You won't be alone. The pro boats and some of the higher end recreational boats or expedition class, there's probably about, I'd say 20 out of 70 boats are fairly competitive. And these are people that know each other. I mean, there's a bit of a circuit, it's in Ontario and even wider than that. And most of these people know each other. And as much as the racing is really important, these people getting together and meeting each other once or twice a year at these events is pretty special to see.
So if I put a motor on my boat, would that disqualify me on my canoe?
Yeah, one of I don't want to say unfortunate, but one of the hard things that I had to do or be was I was actually the race official.
Oh, really? Wow.
And there are rules, and and I would have people coming up and telling me, because I'm not at every spot, this guy was doing this out there. Is he allowed to do that? And I'd have to arbitrate some of those things. It was never difficult. It's just the way that it is. So that gives you an idea, though, that there are a handful of people that are ultra competitive and are looking for any edge that they can get. A motor? No.
So what are some of the rules? Like, is there that you see that are like, those are no-nos, like don't do that? I like, because I just haven't really looked down through the rules of a lot of them. Is there anything that you think would pertain to me where you're like, you can't do that?
Motor, that's a good
yeah,
one.
That's fair.
Or getting out at a portage, putting your canoe on a car and going down the road.
I didn't even think about that.
I shouldn't be giving people ideas. It's pretty simple. You paddle away. There are 4 checkpoints along the way where there are staff or volunteers that keep track of the racers. You have to go through those 4 checkpoints. Other than that, more or less the route is up to you, but you need to go through the 4 checkpoints. So take a look at a map, Ben, figure out where they are.
Do a lot of people not finish every year? Or like, is that like does it matter? Or is that kind of a black stain on your reputation if you can't make it all the way?
I wouldn't call it a black stain. You know what? Almost everybody makes it. So no pressure at all, Ben. Cool. But some people don't. I mean, there are reasons why they don't. We've had people, because of the bad weather, just get themselves in a circumstance where they feel that they need to pull out. Some people, it is a bit too much for them. I'm not supposed to give you too much advice, Ben, I suppose, but I'm not a race official anymore.
That's
so
true.
What the heck? You don't get a heavy canoe, Ben.
We did rent one. I don't know much about different kinds of canoes, but I think, Bill, you know the one we rented, right?
I think so. I think it's a reasonable weight because, again, you'll be carrying that canoe and some of the portages. And Brian's quite right. For many people, it's the challenge of doing this at least once, and if it gets in their blood, they'll do it many times. But it's something. If you're canoeing, you think, and the race format is new to you. You want to try it, so that's where you and Michaela are right now, and you'll try it and you'll see, and there's no shame in if you don't make it to that last checkpoint, but I'm sure I think you will. And again, a respectable time. If you any time is respectable, but as a lot of people get there around 10 hours, and that's fair, as opposed to the 5.5 hours with the record holders. And looking at some of the names in the list, Mark Clout has probably paddled that race so many times, and I was thinking, and I saw Max Fickelstein on here, who wrote a book, and I should have looked this one up, and it's bad preparation, but he did it solo, and of course, over the years, there's been other categories added, like kayaks and paddle boards, and again, the shorter race starting at Sammy D. Champlain Provincial Park, and then the 13K going back to the island in Mattawa. So I know you were opted for that, but no, you're going to do the full meal deal of this race.
Yeah, I wasn't the one who applied. I want to get into a little bit about the history, just in terms of Brian, as when you worked and you kind of did the role that you did. What did you find like this canoe race? And I know we talked about it a little bit, but what the canoe race kind of meant to the community, what it meant to the, conservation authority and to those people as a whole. Why is this canoe race so special to people?
Well, I mean, it's the heritage and tradition, not just from 1967 and the centennial year, but Bill spoke to this a little bit, but the waterways and the lakes were our highways. And they've been the highways for our First Nation Indigenous communities for millennium. And it's how we opened up Canada for Europeans to come. But of course, the First Nations people were using these routes. It doesn't show up on the Mattawa section of the route, but if you go over to the French River, and look at some of the portages there, you can see that going back thousands and thousands of years, people have been traveling on those routes, and you can actually see where the footprints and where they were hauling things from. So, that's the thing that really strikes me. This is all of us sort of retracing human history going back. I'm not even sure, 10,000 years, and so that's really important. And, to be a little bit economic about it, I mean, it's a good thing. People come from, if you look at the list of the winners, if you go onto the website, and I'm sure some of you have, I'm certain Bill has, but people are coming from all over the place. We've had people from the States, but if you look at past winners, they're from Arnprior, Ottawa, Golden Lake, places in southern Ontario, Collingwood, Cambridge. Parry Sound has got a wonderful canoe club, and they support the event. I
didn't realize it was this important to just Ontario and beyond. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, people that race marathon canoe races, this is kind of the jewel of the season, so to speak, because of the variety and length of the race, that's for sure. But further to what Brian said, thousands of years, Indigenous people, you're paddling and walking in the footsteps of legends, Indigenous peoples, and then, Champlain, Etienne Brulé, La Vérendrye, Radisson Groseille, who created the Hudson Bay Company, Fraser Thompson Mackenzie, the great English explorers, the rivers are named after in Canada, and even Sir John Franklin on one of his early overland expeditions walked the portages, and the portages, I often take people to the one at Sammy D. Champlain Provincial Park at the west end, where it's about 30 centimeters wide and I guess certainly more than 10, 20 centimeters deep, and that's people walking in the same place for 3,000 years or more, and so all those historic carrying places are like that. Talon Chutes is named after Jean Talon, one of the first intendants of New France at the time, and so it's a storied canoe race. I can't think of no better setting of that, and the reason for that, of course, is why everyone came that way is that the Mississippi River was way too long. James Bay and Hudson Bay were full of ice, and so the way to get into the interior of North America was the Ottawa, Mattawa, Upper and Lower French Rivers, Georgian Bay, and then Lake Huron into Lake Superior. So this is the way to go, and it was forward thinking way back when you had the Ville Marie to North Bay Canoe Race, and then shortened then again, because in essence, I think probably at the time it was difficult to organize a 196 kilometer race, whereas a 64 kilometer race, and having an organization look after it is far more efficient. Because in any event, it's not like a concert. There's all these safety things and officials and checkpoints and awards and getting people in the water, off the water, getting them ferried back and forth. There's a lot of logistics, and so I think people look forward to this as is really a badge of honor. Certainly, when anytime you complete that distance, it's a good day when you do 64 kilometers in a canoe.
Do we get like shirts that say you survived?
We'll get you one. We'll get Scott Clark on that for sure, and I'm sure that's in the offing. Maybe
Brian, you can talk a little bit about what goes, and I know we mentioned it a little bit, but what goes on to put on an event like this? We know there's volunteers, there's a dinner afterwards, there's all the officials, but how long does this take for you guys to kind of organize, and the amount of work that you put on in the background so people can enjoy this?
Well, once the one event ends, the primary staff member, Paula Loranger, who is just fantastic at organizing this, takes a couple of well-deserved weeks off. And then when she's back at work, one of her duties that she takes care of so well is to start planning for the next year.
Wow. So this is almost like a full-time job, basically.
It's not full-time, but it's time-consuming, and you need to plan that far out. And so with staff and the volunteers, a couple of weeks after the event, there's a debrief. How did things go? What went right? What may have gone wrong? What can we do better? And, and there are sponsors. You can't put on an event like this without some funding and some sponsors. So you have to start thinking about sponsorships and reaching out to people. There's quite a bit of effort that goes into organizing it, and it really ramps up, once you get into the new year with Paula at the lead. But at least in my days, Paula at the lead, and getting staff and volunteers organized and ready to go. As we're speaking here today, I sort of imagined this morning when I got up that Paula would be in a canoe checking the route out and finding out for you, Ben.
Does she do the whole route?
Yeah, she has, but she does it in sections.
Okay, I was going to say she can come in our canoe, help us out.
Yeah, and so she checks out the route, checks the water levels, talks to people that we know along the river, like Bill, so that we can give everybody the best update possible on race morning about what the conditions are like.
Is there any sort of government red tape that you have to kind of dance around at all because you are traveling between different municipalities and stuff, or is it that there's not really an issue there?
No, there's no issue, and the majority of the route, as people may or may not know, actually runs through the provincial park of the Mattawa River and Samuel de Champlain Provincial Park. A lot of the shorelines of even the lakes, starting from the stepping stones in Trout Lake, down through and past the chutes and down to Samuel de Champlain is provincial park. So there's not really jurisdictional issues that we need to worry about. I mean, the one thing that I will say too, though, is in terms of safety, there is a whole safety protocol, Ben. So just so you're aware, there is a safety plan. We've thought of all the things that could possibly happen and how we would respond. The Ontario Provincial Police has been wonderful with their Marine unit and participating, unless there's something that happens on the day of, being on the lakes and on the route to help us. And there is always either volunteers or staff that are in a backup canoe that canoe pretty much the whole route. And so they're sort of sweeping the whole route and making sure that all those canoe numbers add up and we don't lose anybody along the way.
They're the real heroes, man. You have to well, I'm guessing they're going through sections, but still.
Don't want you to be extricated along the way. No, because it won't be long now. It'll be 50 years in a couple or 3 years. And anything that augurs well to the long storied history of the race. And Ben, again, I wanted to remind you that the fastest is 5 hours, 27 minutes and 53 seconds. So you just being in the race is I think that's an honor in itself.
It sounds like a long time, like 5 hours, or sorry, like even if it takes 10 hours, it sounds like a long time, but I feel like it's not. Like I'm sure it goes by pretty quick. Yeah. Right? Am I right, Brian?
Yeah. Yeah. Here's a little secret. You're going to find that there are people that are of your skill set and speed along the route. Even the competitive or the pro boats do this as well. You'll find some people to paddle with and group up along the way and provide moral support for each other and run over each other on the portages trying to get to the other side. But that's typically the way it happens is that there are groups of people that work through. And then once you get past Herdman Dam near to Mattawa, that's when you need to blast. You need to go fast and beat all of those friends you've made along the way to the island.
I do have one more rules question, and this one's really important because Michaela doesn't believe me. If I bring a drum, you know how they have in those race canoes, they have the person that drums. If I bring a drum and I do that, I don't have to paddle, just bring the drum. Is that part of the rules? Like, is that within the rule set?
Oh, absolutely.
Perfect.
I don't know that your partner would be very happy.
Well, it's the rhythm, right?
It's
all about the rhythm.
Yeah.
There you go. Bill's also going to be going beside us and
I'll
give you
the encouragement. I don't know how you're going to paddle and drum at the same time, but anyway.
Who said anything about paddling?
Okay.
Anyways, Brian, thank you so much for joining us. I'm looking very forward to doing this. Are you going to be in the race at all? Are you going to be involved in any way?
Myself? No, I'm afraid not. No.
Well, I won't see you. But Bill, I know you have any last words from your end.
Yeah, no, I heard the word hope, and of course that's the most dangerous of emotions to utter, and so. But we'll look forward to hearing back from Ben and Michaela and Scott Clark's generous offers here in the North Bay to Mattawa Canoe Race. And Brian, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Enjoy, Ben. Have a good time.
Thank you.
And you'll make it.
A big thank you to Brian for hopping on with us. I can tell you, I definitely feel more confident, not too confident about having to race at 7:30 in the morning and having to be there. I think it's at like 6:30. So we'll see how that. It might be a slow start to this race, but I'm sure it'll be a fun day. I feel a little bit more confident with the fact that it's not going to be a lot of just everybody trying to go, right to the wall trying to race. So I'm excited to see kind of what happens out of it. And yes, I know what you're thinking. The drum already purchased. It's ready to go. Michaela's not happy about it, but it's going to happen. So next Wednesday's episode, I'm actually going to be pulling Michaela on, and myself, Bill, and her are going to be discussing the aftermath of this race. I think we're going to try to get some video too, maybe mic us up, so there might be some social media stuff that comes out of it. So you won't want to miss that. That'll be next Wednesday morning on the next episode of the Backroads Bill podcast. If you do want to find more episodes, though, of the Backroads Bill podcast, check us out on our website, NorthBayEcho.ca. You can also find us on all of your favorite podcast players like Apple and Spotify. And if you want to find more of the other local podcasts that we have going in the North Bay area, you can check out NorthBayEcho.ca and sign up for our free newsletter, Echo Essentials, to keep up to date with everything going on in our community. But we'll see you next week, or maybe not, depending on how Saturday goes. But hopefully we'll be back next week for another Backroads adventure.